It's not often that I'll remark the mighty US federal government just isn't asking that much. But that is the response I've had to events that unfolded over the last few days. The US ambassador to South Africa, speaking at the BizNews conference in Hermanus, about an hour and a half drive from where I am in Cape Town, gave South Africa 5 requests. Now, I had 2 thoughts when I heard these requests. The first was, well, those all sound fairly reasonable. The very next one was, I think South Africa's mainstream are going to find these outrageous. Now, the requests really came down to 5 things. 1, condemn the Kill the Boer chant. 2, prioritize rural killings. 3, rethink BEE, that is the racial policies in South Africa. 4, if you have to expropriate land, pay market prices. And 5, stay out of Iran. Now, here is my very brief reasoning why each of these is at least reasonable. First, condemning the Kill the Boer chant. In other words, kill the white farmer, the white Afrikaans farmer. This has become a favorite chant of the EFF, the misnamed economic freedom fighters. There is a fascinating legal argument here. I'm about as close as you get to a free speech absolutist. But we don't have to have that legal debate now. Asking an administration to condemn people in that country chanting and calling for the killing of an identity group within that country is not much to ask. Number 2, prioritize rural and farm murders. I think it's fair, based on the data out there, to say that farm murders are by frequency and nature deserving of particular attention. I think the one argument against this is to say, but there are far worse crime issues in South Africa. For example, murders on the Cape Flats. I hear people say, well, we need to prioritize the Cape Flats because it's worse than farm killings. I would say we need to keep 2 thoughts in our heads at the same time. The Cape Flats violence and killing, I believe, is worse than farm murders, and farm murders should be treated very seriously. I'm not sure government prioritizing farm killings is necessarily the best tactic, but I think it's at least a reasonable request. BEE. I prefer not to call it black economic empowerment because I don't think that's what it does. I think it's perfectly reasonable for the US to ask the South African government to revisit its laws and policies that force the dividing up of people into different racial groups for different treatment. I think there's been some pushback saying that we can't simply reevaluate US companies. It would make no sense to exempt only US companies, and I agree. The exact number of people who should be mistreated based on their race by central government is 0. And the US, of course, is entitled to focus on its own people. So while they say essentially don't mistreat US companies, I think what they should be saying is don't mistreat anyone. A perfectly reasonable request, I think. Fourth, if you expropriate, pay market prices. This is against the backdrop of legislation which would enable government to expropriate land for what they call zero compensation. Of course, that is to say, not for compensation, or more bluntly, stealing property. I'm inclined to dive into the economic argument, but really there isn't one. Any body of thought that suggests a central government should confiscate property in order to redistribute it is not an economic argument, certainly not a sincere one. It's really an ideology. The economics is very clear. It's not one of the many nuanced areas in economics. The logic, the history are all behind the very clear conclusion that expropriation without compensation for redistribution is a recipe for disaster. It's phenomenal that people can look at Zimbabwe just north of the border and fail to realize that. So again, I think an entirely reasonable request. That said, I would make a far firmer request. And finally, stop meddling in Iran. Now, regardless of your stance on the US attacks on Iran, this is a request from the US that is at least reasonable. They're in a conflict with Iran. We can debate whether that's right or wrong. That's for another time. But it's entirely reasonable for the US to ask South Africa to stay out of their conflict. I would suggest that South Africa is simply in no position to take any side in any foreign conflict. There are so many humanitarian, economic, political, social crises in South Africa. And the government has failed in so many, such important ways, that attempting to exert force or diplomatic power overseas is not only laughable, but terribly wasteful. So these requests, in my view, firstly, are not the way I would put them. I would put these quite differently, but I think the point is simply this. They're all quite reasonable. So to go back to my initial thoughts, one, these are quite modest requests, and two, I think South Africa's commentariat, mainstream, the anointed, the political class, will find these outrageous. I stand by my first point. These are quite modest. And I think the last few days have borne out my second concern. South Africans in those classes, the professional class, the commentariat, etc., many have come out and shown outrage at these requests. As a final note, I don't think that outrage reflects South African opinions broadly. I think there's a great deal of evidence that South Africans don't want anyone chanting, kill the, and insert any group. South Africans don't want property confiscated by the state. They don't want South Africa attempting to interfere in foreign wars, regardless of one's position on those wars. We certainly don't want to be divided up by race, by government, for different treatment. We don't want the tension that causes. We don't want the costs and bureaucracy that it adds to our businesses, and we don't want the corruption that it enables. And we certainly don't want farm and rural murders to be ignored. So, in my view, these are quite modest requests, not the precise requests I would make, but the outrage from certain sectors of South Africa, quite predictable.